Stop trusting critics. They called these games broken, outdated, nothing but a gimmick. They missed it completely. These 15 titles transform you into a literal god, where pantheons crumble and worlds bend to your will. You're not just powerful, you're inevitable. One of these is about to become your obsession. Game 15, Oblivion Remastered. The hero of Kvatch starts the story as a total nobody, just a nameless prisoner rotting in a cell with zero destiny and even less power. By the time this journey reaches its peak, you aren't just a strong warrior, because you actually ascend to become Sheogorath, the god of madness himself. Think about that character arc for a second, where you go from being locked in total darkness to literally rewriting the laws of reality as a Daedric prince. When the remaster finally dropped, critics absolutely tore the scaling system apart, complaining that the numbers were completely broken. What those reviews missed is that the jank is actually a feature, and once you understand how the math works, you start exploiting the systems on purpose. You aren't accidentally breaking the game. The game is actively inviting you to shatter its limits, so you can achieve true godhood. The real shift happens the moment you close the gates of Oblivion and realize that your mortal life is officially over. Chaos becomes your primary domain as the Prince of Madness, and the remaster on PC and PS5 finally gives these cosmic moments the high-end visuals they always deserved. Game 14, God of War Ragnarok. Kratos doesn't spend his time praying to the heavens or trying to negotiate with his enemies because he prefers to dismantle them with his bare hands. Armed with a spear forged from his own bottomless rage, every single encounter is a display of pure, visceral brutality that leaves the environment stained red. Some people claim he's gone soft now, that he's a father figure, but they couldn't be more wrong, because the violence has simply become more surgical and terrifying. When you finally go toe-to-toe with Heimdall, you get to watch a god descend into a total panic, because his legendary clairvoyance can't see your strikes coming. After that, the King of Thunder falls, and Odin himself gets executed by a man who simply refused to stay dead, no matter how many gods try to put him in the ground. These finishers aren't acts of mercy, they are cold-blooded executions, where the camera zooms in tight to show you every gruesome detail. You watch Kratos position his grip before he moves with a series of strikes that cause the god in front of you to literally shatter into pieces. As the blood sprays and the bones crack, the entire world seems to tremble under the weight of a power display that proves you own the fight completely. Every divine death you cause reshapes the entire cosmos, and you aren't out here saving people so much as you are ending entire ages of history. Enemies start to ragdoll like they weigh nothing at all, mostly because they are nothing compared to the monster you've become by the final act. You are watching the most powerful beings in existence break apart under your fists, reduced to mere bodies, because one mortal was too angry to die. Game 13, Immortals Fenyx Rising. You play as a demigod named Fenyx who walks into a broken Greece where the entire pantheon is falling apart. By the credits, you've become more powerful than the entire group combined, stronger than Zeus, faster than Hermes, smarter than Aphrodite. You aren't just a hero in their world anymore, you've become a true deity, surrounded by washed-up legends who can't keep up. Critics called it a Zelda clone. They missed it completely. The combat flows like a demigod conducting violence, and the weapon system, heavy axes of Ares, blades of Hermes, feels brutally distinct. Chain a slam into an aerial dash and a spinning strike, and you realize this isn't Nintendo's game, it's your symphony. You move from careful early game to mid-game, where you chain lightning into fire and ice, melting the screen while remaining untouchable. Late game, Fenyx is a force of nature. The gods start to realize they're terrified of what you've become. They dominated this world for eons, but you've broken every rule they established and conquered the mountain for yourself. By the end, you're wielding full godly powers, commanding nature, creating portals between realms, and the game celebrates the fact that the old gods would lose if they ever faced you. But here's the kicker. These next few titles don't just stop at killing gods, they actually let you reshape entire worlds and rewrite the very fabric of reality. Game 12, Elden Ring. You start your journey as Maidenless, a total nobody, just another tarnished with zero status in a brutal world that doesn't even acknowledge you exist. In those early hours, everything destroys you, whether it's a basic knight at a gate or a dragon crushing you into the dirt, because everything wins and everything hurts. By the time the credits roll, you've ascended to become the Elden Lord, which means you are the literal law that governs how reality functions. This isn't just some metaphorical title or a cutscene reward, because your final choice actually dictates the physical laws of the lands between. Whether you decide to restore the Golden Order or usher in the Age of Stars, you aren't just beating a boss, you're deciding what existence looks like for everyone left alive. But the real god tier moment happens when you master the systems. Early on, you're struggling to survive, managing stamina, planning every swing. One mistake kills you. But once you understand mechanics like poise breaks and stance damage, everything flips. You interrupt attacks mid-animation, stagger bosses, and chain elemental effects together until the screen melts. Even the most terrifying late-game gods fall in seconds. The genius is the contrast. Critics said the difficulty was unfair, but they missed the point. The struggle has to be there so that when you optimize your build and master the mechanics, ascending feels earned. Moving from getting wrecked by basic soldiers to deleting gods in seconds is an intentional power arc, and that payoff is the heart of the game. That moment when you realize you've transcended into god tier power hits so much harder because you remember what it was like to be weak. Once you crack the code, Elden Ring becomes a masterclass in world ownership, proving you haven't just grown stronger, but have literally rewritten reality through mechanical perfection. You are the Elden Lord, and you earned that title by becoming an unstoppable force that the world can no longer contain. Game 11, Baldur's Gate 3. Most people play through Baldur's Gate 3 trying to be the hero, but the real power trip is ascending as the god of ambition. If you follow Gale's path, you consume a dead god's essence and rewrite reality itself. You become untouchable, unquestionable, completely divine. The catch is brutal. You gain everything, absolute power, total control, reality bending to your will. But the companions who traveled by your side for 100 hours now fear or resent you. Every meaningful connection is severed. You're sitting on a throne of infinite power, completely alone, wondering if godhood was ever worth the price of your soul. It's not a victory, it's a tragedy wrapped in divine light. Game 10, Dragon's Dogma 2. In this world, you are the Arisen, which means destiny itself has handpicked you to replace the Seneschal and become the god who sustains all of creation. That is your birthright and your sole purpose. But the game takes a wild turn by suggesting that the ultimate power move isn't taking the throne at all. The real god tier moment comes when you decide to break the cycle completely by using the Godsbane blade on yourself and the dragon. By shattering the eternal loop of creation and destruction, you set humanity free from divine puppet strings and let the world find its own way. Critics whined about the save system and the travel mechanics when it launched, but they were so focused on the technical side that they missed the philosophical payoff. You possess the power to destroy the very system that made you a god, and rejecting that divinity is the most powerful thing you can do. Whether you're pinning griffins to cliffs with your bare hands or ending the world cycle, you aren't just saving a world, you're deciding if it even gets to exist. Now, this is where the power fantasy shifts gears, because these next games don't just make you strong, they turn you into a legend that the entire world fears. Game 9, Ghost of Tsushima. Jin Sakai eventually transforms into the Ghost, but he isn't just a samurai using dirty tricks, he's a myth that haunts the dreams of his enemies. He becomes a legend so terrifying that Mongol soldiers will literally collapse in fear just because they heard his name whispered in the dark. This isn't your typical stealth game where you hide because you're afraid. It's a psychological warfare simulator where you hide because you're a monster. Enemies panic the second they realize you're there, breaking their formations and running for their lives before the fight even starts. That isn't just a clever bit of game design, it's the feeling of having a reputation so massive that it wins battles before you even draw your steel. The peak God tier moment is the Ghost Stance, where time slows and your blade moves like silk through surrounded enemies. They can't react, so they just stand there frozen as you dismantle them in a demonstration of absolute dominance. Every survivor realizes they're next, and their psychological break becomes complete. You aren't a man anymore, you're a force of nature that cannot be stopped by armor. The real power move here isn't the sharpness of your blade, but the weight of the legend you've built throughout the story. You aren't just fighting a war anymore, you're executing a sentence, and the entire island of Tsushima belongs to you. When the game first dropped, critics spent all their time talking about samurai honor and the internal conflict of the narrative, but they missed the mechanical payoff. They completely overlooked what it feels like to be so legendary that your mere presence decides the outcome of a battle before it begins. That's why the Ghost Stance exists, not as a simple combat buff, but as proof that terror beats honor every single time you step onto the field. Game 8. The Witcher 3. Wild Hunt. Geralt of Rivia is a genetic freak, a being engineered in a lab to be something much more than human, and he spent his life becoming a hunter of gods. He spends his days killing monsters that entire kingdoms are afraid of, and his decisions have the power to reshape the borders of nations. Emperors are forced to bow to his expertise, and kings have to negotiate with him because he's the only one capable of handling the world's darkest threats. Critics called it just another open-world RPG with too many icons on the map, but they miss the sheer weight of the authority Geralt carries. Every choice you make ripples outward through the world, meaning you aren't just playing a story, you're acting as a deity who decides the future of civilizations. The true power moment arrives when you finally face the King of the Wild Hunt, a being that should be an unstoppable god to any normal man. You walk into that final confrontation knowing that you are the only creature on the planet strong enough to win, and that feeling of being the world's only hope is pure godhood. Game 7. Assassin's Creed Valhalla. You start as a Viking raider, but you're actually the reincarnation of Odin himself. The genius is how the game never forces you to pick a side. You are simultaneously Eivor commanding Viking armies across England and Odin walking through Asgard as a literal deity. In the mortal world, you build an empire through force and strategy. Kings crumble under your banner. Then you step into the godly realm where you command divine authority and reshape reality itself. The duality never breaks. You can raid a fortress 1 hour and walk the halls of Asgard the next, experiencing what it feels like to be a god wearing human skin. People complained the game was too long, but they missed the point. That scale is exactly necessary for a god tier experience. More quests mean more kingdoms bending to your will. More time in Asgard means more moments of actual godhood. The length isn't a flaw, it's proof that you're operating at a scale that makes other games look small. But the real power trip isn't just about being strong, it's about building an empire and making the entire world bend to your will. There is something visceral about commanding massive armies and watching your enemies break before the first sword is even drawn. Game 6. Middle-earth Shadow of War. The Nemesis system is pure genius because it transforms you into a psychological god who doesn't just kill orcs, but dominates their very existence. You aren't merely swinging a sword, you are breaking their minds and turning them into a personal army that lives and dies for you. Here is the power fantasy. You capture a high-ranking captain, shame him in front of his own loyal troops to drive him insane, and then promote him into your own ranks. He belongs to you now, and because his loyalty is absolute, you've effectively taken the enemy's strongest soldier and forced him to worship you. That is God-tier control. When this game dropped, critics called it bloated and complained there were too many systems and too many orcs to manage, but they were completely wrong. That bloat is the entire point of the experience, because more orcs means more minds to dominate and more captains to turn into your personal servants. The true god moment hits once you've built a full warband with captains who have specific strengths, trolls at your command, and war drakes tearing through enemy defenses. You aren't just fighting anymore, you're executing a grand vision and watching an entire fortress collapse because you orchestrated every single move. The world actually remembers your actions. The enemy culture shifts around your presence, and you eventually become the most terrifying figure in the entire mythology. Game 5. Palworld. This one takes a different approach to power, because you aren't fighting ancient gods or commanding monsters through fear, but building a corporate empire through pure efficiency. You start out in a standard survival mode where you hunt, gather and build, and at first, catching pals feels like a wholesome experience where you're just a trainer bonding with creatures. Everything changes once you unlock the industrial phase, and the vibe shifts completely, leading you to extract crude oil and build massive factories. You create automated production lines that never stop and never sleep, and by the mid-game you might have thousands of pals optimized for very specific roles. Miners extract ore while farmers harvest crops, and transport pals move resources through complex conveyor systems, all while electricity pals feed power into a massive grid. This is godhood achieved through logistics, where you aren't wielding magic but bending reality through superior organization and the automation of life itself. The world stops being a place for you to explore and instead becomes infrastructure, where coal deposits are just extraction points and forests are nothing more than timber yards. Everything gets categorized and optimized, eventually being converted into resources that flow through your factories with a cold and perfect efficiency. Every factory you build represents a level of pure control that a simple warlord could never achieve, because you are ruling through absolute economic dominance. Your automated systems become so efficient that independent survivors can't even hope to compete, and they eventually become dependent on your infrastructure because no other alternative exists. Critics dismiss this as a Pokemon clone after watching 30 minutes of catching and bonding, but they completely miss the point of the game. This isn't about training partners, it's about building a global hegemon and watching your industrial machine grow so massive that the entire world has to operate by your rules. Economies would collapse without your resources, and nations couldn't function without your power grid, making you a corporate deity and the architect of a new world order. You aren't in this world to help people, you are here to own them, and the world doesn't need heroes as much as it needs your factories to keep running. And believe me, they always do. In V Rising, you are a vampire lord, which means you aren't a servant or a creature hiding in the shadows, but a ruler rebuilding a kingdom from nothing. Your power comes directly from absorbing V blood, so every time you kill a boss and drain them, you unlock new abilities like flight or mind control. Each drop of V blood acts like a ladder rung that you climb toward true godhood, and the deeper systems allow you to strategically choose which creatures to drink from based on their blood properties. If you drink worker blood, your resource yield increases, while scholar blood boosts your spell power, allowing you to optimize your god tier build through literal consumption. The real kicker here is your reputation, because you aren't just powerful, you are feared to the point that humans flee on sight and enemies whisper your name. The world bends because you control the flow of life, and you aren't just surviving as a vampire, you are thriving as a god while your castle grows and your servants multiply. By the time you reach the end, you've built an entire empire fueled by your own personal power, and you sit at the center of a world where everything orbits you. Everything serves your needs, and everything bends to your whim simply because you decided it would, and that is the ultimate pattern of dominance. Now we are getting into the wild stuff, where the games don't just give you armies, but hand you magic that is reality breaking and screen melting. This isn't the balanced kind of sorcery you find in most RPGs, this is world dominating power that makes you feel like a force of nature. Game 3. Forspoken. This is the ultimate flop redemption story, especially since critics absolutely tore Forspoken apart when it first dropped back in early 2023. They complained that the dialogue was cringe and the voice acting was annoying, but they completely missed the fact that the combat is a genuine masterpiece. Frey Holland gets transported to the world of Athia and becomes infected with a type of magic that transforms her into a calamity-level threat. Once you actually unlock the high-level spells, the entire world starts to tremble beneath your feet, and the god-tier moment arrives when you start using surge magic. You can chain elemental spells together, flowing from fire into water and then into lightning, creating a symphony of destruction that deletes enemies before they can even react. The parkour system is equally insane, allowing you to move at god-tier speeds across impossible landscapes while leaping over massive chasms and running straight up waterfalls. The world simply cannot contain you because you are too fast and too powerful for any obstacle to stand in your way. Frey becomes so dangerous that the people of Athia view her with a mix of worship and terror, which is exactly the kind of power fantasy we crave. Yes, some of the dialogue is a bit much, but once you are vaporizing entire squads with elemental chains at light speed, you honestly won't care. Critics buried what is essentially a 10 out of 10 sleeper hit because they only listened to the first 30 minutes instead of playing until the real power kicked in. Game 2, Hogwarts Legacy. You start the game as a 5th year student who is late to the party, and honestly, nobody should be afraid of a kid who is just playing catch up. But the twist is that you wield ancient magic, a force so volatile that even the most famous professors at Hogwarts can't control or even fully understand it. While dark wizards might fear the killing curse, ancient magic makes that look like a simple parlor trick, because it is a reality warping power that exists outside of normal laws. Critics spend all their time focusing on the student life aspects like classes and common room vibes, but they missed the terrifying transformation happening right under their noses. While they were obsessing over school drama, you were becoming the most dangerous being in the entire wizarding world, and the faculty and dark lords alike eventually realize it. The true power moment hits when you use ancient magic finishes, while being completely surrounded and outnumbered by enemies closing in for the kill. When you activate that power, time seems to crystallize, and the world freezes before your magic erupts outward as a raw force of nature that obliterates everything. The screen practically melts as enemies vaporize or get slammed into walls by arcane energy that doesn't bother asking for permission to exist. You might be wearing school robes, but you are a god, and even masters like Dumbledore or Snape are nothing compared to the entity you have become. Professors actually pale when you walk past them in the halls, and dark wizards break down mentally just knowing that you are coming for them. By the end of the journey, you aren't a student anymore. You are a calamity that the rest of the wizarding world simply has to survive. Game 1. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Cal Kestis isn't struggling to find his footing anymore, because Jedi Survivor assumes you've already won your early battles and lets you start the game strong. You have access to 5 different lightsaber stances, including the heavy crossguard and the versatile blaster style, and every single one of them feels like it can crush anything in its path. The Force powers are where the true godhood lives, especially when you use Mind Trick to turn enemies into allies mid-battle, or use telekinesis to ragdoll entire squads. You are one man standing against the entire galactic empire, but because your powers are so advanced, it feels like you are the one who has the advantage. The absolute god-tier moment happens when you start pulling TIE fighters right out of the sky and crushing entire squads of stormtroopers with a single thought. The Empire keeps sending armies to stop you, but you just delete them from existence, because your victory has become an inevitability. This is a power fantasy that refuses to nerf the player, choosing instead to let you escalate and dominate until you have fully embraced your role as a Force God. You are a one-man army and a threat to the galaxy that simply cannot be stopped, no matter how many ships they throw at you. The ultimate power fantasy is not about perfect balance, it is about pure inevitability. You step onto the battlefield and the entire world just ends. So drop your favorite god tier moment in the comments below. Which one are you diving into first? Subscribe for more games that actually respect your time.